Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Tracy Cook. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast, DevSecOps with Jenkins, GitHub, and Eclipse by Sonatype. I'm Tracy Cook with Application Development Trends, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Please feel free to type your questions into the Ask a Question box on the console at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many of your questions as we can during the live event. And the entire webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing, and we'll send you an email when the replay is available, and that should be in approximately 24 to 48 hours from now. And you can access the replay using the same link you used today. Now I'd like to move forward with the webcast. We have two speakers from Sonatype with us today. Up a little later is Justin Young. Justin's an optimistic trendsetter at Sonatype, building integrations between Nexus products and DevOps tooling. Justin has held positions throughout the software development lifecycle, with most of his career focused on software development across the stack. Most recently, he is product owner at Sonatype, working on shifting component decision-making into the hands of developers by enabling them with Sonatype Nexus products. And up first is Michelle Dufty, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Sonatype, where she brings solutions to market that help organizations accelerate DevOps early, everywhere, at scale. Michelle has over 20 years of experience helping organizations leverage software and technologies to better compete and serve their mission. Michelle started her career as a management consultant at Ernst & Young and Accenture and has worked in enterprise software ever since. So we're in great shape today with our speakers. And so, Michelle, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. Before I get started and kind of talk a little bit about the topic for today and present and share it with Justin, I want to talk a little bit about who Sonatype is. Many of you may not have heard of us or heard of Sonatype, but you may have heard of the Nexus Repository Manager, which is really our kind of our flagship solution. But just to give a little bit of a brief history about who we are, 16 years ago, our founders served as the core contributors to Apache Maven. That's the world's first build automation tool that popularized component-based development for over 9 million Java developers. For those of you who are Java developers, I'm sure you're very familiar with Maven. And then after that, our founders created Maven Central to foster the sharing of open innovation between developers. And today, Maven Central is the world's largest public repository of open source components for the Java ecosystem. And we service 52 billion download requests, and that was just last year alone. So we are still the stewards and the creators of the central repository. Shortly after that, our founders saw the need to manage open source and software components locally within an organization, and so we created the world's most popular repository manager, like I mentioned, Nexus, which many of you probably use or are familiar with, because that is used by more than 120,000 organizations worldwide. And today, our data research team is really a key part of our company and our product portfolio. They analyze over 19 billion components annually and provide very precise intelligence about the security and quality of open source components for DevOps teams around the world. So that's just a brief history about who we are. And I also want to share with you a little brief history about our solutions and specifically the Nexus platform. We do offer a complete platform that basically provides component management and component intelligence. And as a part of that component intelligence, we provide a policy engine so you can automate and enforce your open source policies at scale with that precise intelligence I mentioned. So making up our Nexus platform is first the Nexus repository. As I mentioned, that's really our solution for component management and allows you to organize and store your component parts in the repository and then share them across the DevOps pipeline with your development counterparts across your organization. We also have Nexus Firewall, which Justin's actually going to demo and talk about a little bit later. But this solution actually allows you to vet your component parts early and stop defective components from even entering your supply chain in the first part. So using that policy engine that I mentioned, Firewall enables you to quarantine components that don't meet your corporate policy guidelines so that you, as developers, you're not even using components or don't have access to components that you shouldn't. And Nexus Lifecycle is our solution that allows you to, that provides that component intelligence everywhere throughout the development pipeline and integrates with all of the DevOps tools you use today. And so you can use that intelligence to make sure that you are accurately monitoring and enforcing your open source policies as early as the IDE through build and even in production and continuously monitoring components once they're into production. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the platform, and we'll go into more detail about those products when Justin gets on and gives a demonstration. Before we move forward with Justin, I also want to talk a little bit about a recent survey we did. We did a DevSecOps survey earlier this year, and one of the questions we asked the participants was, does your organization perform automated application security testing within your CI/CD practices? So we are seeing a shift in organizations really starting to move security practices left. And so this question was to get at the heart of how many organizations are starting to look at security within CI/CD. And what we found is that 39% of those participants have done some type of automated security testing within CI/CD. If they're Nexus users, Nexus repository users, that was a little bit higher. That was 43%. But we also asked the respondents about the maturity of their DevOps practices. And for those that admitted that they were more mature DevOps shops, they actually had a higher response to performing automated application security testing within CI/CD, and that was about 58%. So we are seeing some movement shifting left, especially the more mature you are as a DevOps organization. Another question we asked was, at what point in the development process does your organization perform application security analysis? So the first question was specifically around CI/CD. This question is something that we asked the respondents in 2014, and then we asked them again just this year in 2017. And it's interesting to note that we are seeing an uptick in, as I mentioned, organizations doing application security analysis earlier in the development lifecycle. So the blue bar is the percentage of responses from 2014. The yellow is the percentage of people who are doing application security analysis in 2017. And once again, if they identified themselves as a mature DevOps practice, you can see that they're doing much more application security analysis. So they really are moving it into development and into design and architecture, in addition to QA and test and into production and throughout the process. So we're here to talk about the value of doing application security analysis early in the development lifecycle and everywhere so that you can really scale your DevOps practices. So with that, we have solutions. Our Nexus Lifecycle Firewall solutions allow you to identify security vulnerabilities, license restrictions, and really identify the quality of your open source components throughout your entire SDLC. And when we talk about shifting left, as we mentioned, a lot of people are starting to look at doing application security analysis and testing within CI and CD. And that's one place where we provide our component intelligence with Jenkins, and Justin's going to talk about that. If you go a little bit even further left, we have organizations who are starting to want to identify the quality and security of the components that are being developed within a GitHub pull request. And so that's something we're going to talk about and show you today. We also provide our component intelligence directly within the IDE. So Justin's going to show how that works with Eclipse. We support IntelliJ and Visual Studio as well. And really, when we talk about shifting security practices left, in my mind, you can go all the way left or as far left as you can go with, as I mentioned, our firewall solution that works with our Nexus repository. So being able to make sure that components that have security vulnerabilities or that you shouldn't use from a license perspective or that just really don't fit your architectural policies, that they don't even get into your repository in the first place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin, who's going to talk about each one of these things in a little more detail and give you a demonstration.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle and Tracy. So I have some slides that I'm going to go through fairly quickly, and then the meat of the demo or the presentation will be in a demonstration. As Michelle said, enforcement is very important in the CI/CD pipeline. You see it with tests, but it's also important to have good components and an understanding of what's actually going into your software. So here's kind of an overview of a continuous delivery pipeline, and it gets fairly complex. You have a bunch of different libraries getting munched together, compiled, pushed up to Nexus Repository Manager, and at one point you want a gate to make sure that what's going out to production has quality components. And we talked about security vulnerabilities licensing. Those are the kinds of metrics that we want to declare as quality. Here we have IQ around the final step. So perhaps you're building a Docker image that you want to deploy and you want to do analysis on that Docker image or maybe a fat jar or something like that. This diagram is fairly accurate. We actually suggest that you do component analysis maybe even earlier on so that the libraries that you built are analyzed as well, and then you can get to the core of the problem if you're bringing in a vulnerable component. Likewise, we provide that data to GitHub. So most organizations have a branching strategy which enables code review and enables the team to go through and see the changes. And part of that is the code itself, but also what you introduce in the code. So people see Sonar, for example, is a good example of a quality check in a pull request, but also Nexus IQ provides data as to the components that you've chosen. Really, at the core of it, we build a governance tool that allows you to make sure nothing goes to production that is vulnerable or unwanted. But at the core of it, we want to have a developer tool. We want to enable developers to make the right decisions and allow them to have all the intelligence that our governance tool provides. This really allows you to do this at scale because you don't have a long turnaround process where things fail in production or during a build and you have to go back to the developer. From the get-go, the developer can use all this information to pick the right component. And then Michelle also mentioned firewall. So perhaps there are some components that are so bad that have, let's say, a security vulnerability that's remotely exploitable or something that you don't even want into your organization. You may have rogue developers who are pushing bits to production without the CI/CD enforcement, and Nexus Firewall prevents these bad components from getting into your organization. So let me get to the demo and show some of this off. All right. Buffering here, but once it gets shown, here is the Nexus IQ server, which I got signed out from. But the Nexus IQ server allows for a pretty complex policy to be generated throughout the organization. So we talked about libraries. I have two here, Synergy and Vertical. They're under an organization integration, let's say my team at Sonatype. And then they're under a root organization. Policy is able to be tailored at all these levels so that you can decide what different risks you're willing to take for libraries or applications or something that gets deployed. We talked about categorization of these policies. So we often see people splitting things into license type policies, security type policies, and then architectural type policies. So for example, license copy left here, GPL is a license that you don't want in a distributed application. So if you're sending out stuff to people, you probably don't want GPL. Using a tag here saying that all distributed applications are not allowed to violate this policy, I can say that anything that has a license threat group of copy left should fail proxy and should fail build. This is a good security gate for my company to ensure that GPL stuff doesn't make it into distributed applications. Similarly, we talked about security. Here, I can say that anything with a security vulnerability severity of greater than 10 is also going to be blocked at both the build and the proxy state. The security vulnerability severity is a metric that Sonatype provides, but it ties directly to things that you're probably more familiar with, like a CVE score. And we don't stop there. There's a lot of information that we have about all these components that we have researched and know about. So here's something where you can make sure that JUnit components aren't put into a production code, or JUnit components aren't deployed, or quality here where for all applications, distributed, hosted, internal, you kind of want to know if you have old components. That's not necessarily bad, but you want to have an understanding if old components are in your systems, because the project may be deprecated or no longer maintained, and you can get in a situation where you're reliant on a project that is never going to be updated. So that's the policy. It's mainly based around the rules engine. We have licensed threat groups and also categories where we talked about how some policy may only be applicable to distributed or hosted or internal applications. So I'd like to go over an example of how this would actually work in real life. I have Nexus IQ server running in my organization, and I am working on a project that's called Hello Spring Web MVC. And I'm going to play the persona of a team lead. I come in the morning, and I'm looking at new JIRA tickets. And I can see here that there's a JIRA ticket from Nexus IQ that says there's a high security alert for Jackson data bind. This is a relatively new one. I'm not sure if anyone's dealt with it, but there's a security vulnerability with Jackson data bind. At this point, I want to learn a little bit more about it before I actually get into the weeds. So what I can do is view a detailed report or go to my CI. I'm going to jump over to CI really quickly, and I can see that master is broken. So the build on master has failed at a Nexus lifecycle analysis. That's good. It means that Nexus lifecycle has identified that Jackson is in my application, and I probably shouldn't proceed. I can jump over to GitHub and get very similar information here. If I go through the commits, I can actually see here a failure on the last commit. Someone on the team committed directly to master update for a Spring Boot starter parent, and that is most likely what brought in my component. So after I have all this information, I probably record it in my JIRA ticket, and I am going to assign it to someone to fix it, to remediate this problem. I don't want to have the vulnerable version of Jackson in my application. So switching personas, now I'm a developer who's working on this, and I jump into Eclipse where I'm doing my day-to-day. I have the exact same information available in Eclipse, and I can see here that Jackson data bind is in fact in my application. And if I go down, I can see there's various versions. This one is vulnerable. I get more information if I view details, and here I can find out that it has a security vulnerability. And actually, I can find the problem code here. So this is what caused it. Opening this up provides me even more information, in particular that this is well, it's a small screen, so I apologize. But this is a deserialization vulnerability. Using all this information, I'm going to choose the easiest fix. I may want to do a little more investigation, but I can see here that the next version, 8.8.1, is not vulnerable. Since it's not even a patch version, we're a point release beyond a patch version, I'm just going to guess that this is the fix for the vulnerability that was found. Clicking on that version, I can see there's no policy threat. So this should pass my policy and be good for my organization. Using the migrate function, I can actually let Nexus IQ come in here and change my dependency management to update to the version 8.8.1. So I can see it's now in here. I can save my new POM. I reanalyze, and lo and behold, everything's gone. I've successfully fixed the problem by updating Jackson. So really quickly, what I'm going to do is actually put this on a branch. Update Jackson. We'll skip verbosity to do this quickly. And I've deployed the fix to GitHub. Jumping back to GitHub, I can see it's available here. But even on CI, I can go to my project, scan the repository, and it should pick up my new branch. Scanning done, and we can see my new branch is building. So while this builds, as a developer, I'd like to get some feedback on this. The problem was caused by someone committing directly to master, but generally we'd like to create a pull request. So I will create a pull request, skipping verbosity as well. And I can see here that checks are being done. In particular, my Nexus lifecycle analysis is now running, and it's making sure that all the components in my application are good to go. Depending on the time here, let's skip forward while Nexus lifecycle analysis runs and talk a little bit about the repository manager. Well, it's done. All right, so just to finish this story up, I can see that the analysis has passed, meaning that my change here has fixed the problem. I would then merge to master, close the ticket up, and everybody on my team would be happy. Now, we have used development tools and used enforcement to make sure that the Hello Spring WebMVC application was not deployed with a vulnerable component. In general, at Sonatype, we encourage enabling developers to make their component choices. With the tools that we provide in the IDE, there's a lot of information there, and developers should know upfront what vulnerabilities are there, what kind of license concerns, or even what kind of quality concerns are in their components. They can make sure they choose a version that has no policy threats and that is okay for the amount of risk that their organization is willing to take. Or they could change components and choose a component that also has no policy threats. As mentioned during the slides, there are some components that you don't even want in your organization, or maybe you have rogue teams that you want to prevent from using bad components. And we provide the firewall to do just that. So once again, logged out. I'm going to jump into Nexus Repository Manager, and I'm actually going to remove my data bind component. The firewall works on new components in the system. It allows you to quarantine new components that go into the system. It also provides an audit of all the components that are currently in the system. We choose not to quarantine components in the system because large organizations could enable firewall and wake up in the morning and have all their builds breaking. There's a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and we want to make sure that people are able to live with their current systems and slowly remediate them in a timely fashion. I guess that's the opposite of slowly. Remediate in a timely fashion. I'm also going to remove it from my local cache. And so we no longer have the vulnerable component in Nexus Repository Manager or locally. In Repository Manager, I can come over, and now what I'd like to do is enable firewall. It is called Audit and Quarantine because that's what it does. It provides an audit of your repositories and it quarantines bad components. So for Maven Central, I would like to enable this. And I am now actively providing a firewall for all components coming through my Maven proxy to any developers in my organization to ensure that the components that come in meet the policies that I've dictated. So I'm going to come back over here, and I was on 2881, but let's jump back to 288, which we know is vulnerable. So I'm trying to build here, and you can see the component doesn't show up anymore in my component info. So I don't have that component in my application. But if I jump over to problems, I actually have an error. My application is no longer compiling. It no longer will proceed because the artifact itself is missing. I was unable to download it. If I go back and want to find more out about this, I can come over to Nexus, jump over to my repositories, and I now see IQ policy violations. There's one that's quarantined, and let's jump over and open this report up. 231's vulnerable as well, but what we're really interested in is 288. So this is a new component, and you can see it's been quarantined. I talked previously about audit, and surprise to me, but data bind was in my organization's repository manager already, and we've audited it. So we've provided information back to you as a team lead or as an architect that says, you probably want to go and find which applications are using this data bind 231 because it's currently vulnerable. 288 is not available. It's in a state of quarantine on my Nexus repository manager. And I can go through and talk to whoever tried to download this and inform them that it needs to be updated. This really is a firewall. Nothing can get in. So it allows you full protection against bad components. But as mentioned, it often is better to allow your developers to choose a component and actually understand that it's bad and use other enforcement points like CI Jenkins, for example, to prevent that component from going out to production. So that, I believe, is my overview. Yeah, it's my overview of what you can do with Nexus IQ Server, how we really enable developers to make the right choices or the best choices for their organization and eliminate all kinds of risk in open source components. I am going to stop the demo. And I believe I'm going to pass it back to Michelle.
Sure, great. Thank you, Justin. So hopefully you all found that to be helpful and clear about how we're helping you really shift your security practices left and to empower developers to really pick quality components from the start. As a part of this presentation and this demo, Justin showed the integrations that we have with Jenkins, GitHub, and Eclipse. But I just wanted to also highlight that, we view our solution as really a tool designed and built for developers that includes security information, license information, and architectural quality information. It's not a security tool that, oh, by the way, just happens to integrate into developers' tool chain. So, as a development tool, we really want to make sure that we provide our component intelligence and our policy engine everywhere throughout your DevOps tool chain that you would want it, and that you can really access it through any of the tools that you're using today to make it much easier to implement and start using. So I just wanted to make you all aware that the three that we mentioned in this webinar and that we talked about are not the only tools that we integrate with. We also integrate with Hudson, Bamboo, and Team City from a CI perspective. We've taken steps to containerize our applications for certain cloud environments like OpenShift and Mesosphere DCOS. We also support integration to a lot of IT automation orchestration tools like Chef and Puppet and Ansible and Zebia Labs and Docker. So there's lots of integration support there. We provide support to public repositories besides Maven Central. So it's not just Maven Central. It's NPM, NuGet, PyPy, RubyGems.org, and so forth. We can integrate to other private repositories other than just Nexus. We also, Justin showed how we integrate with Jira through a Jira ticket. We can also integrate with SonarQube. And from a build perspective, it's not just Maven. It's Ivy, Gradle, and Ant. And I think I mentioned earlier that although we showed Eclipse today, we do support IntelliJ and Visual Studio. So really, no matter what tools you're using in your DevOps practices or your development lifecycle, you can integrate with our whole Nexus platform. So I think with that, we can open it up to some questions. You feel free, as Tracy mentioned, please feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you and answer them. And hopefully, Tracy, we have some questions to get started.
Great. Yeah, we do. And please submit your questions. We look forward to, having a nice Q&A here. Here's the first question. Can firewall be used with Jenkins and Eclipse?
Okay. So as we showed, when you're using Eclipse with firewall, the component's not available to Eclipse. That would be the same in Jenkins, where if it was trying to get anything that's using Maven, would be unable to download the component through your repository. But I think the less literal answer is that often you would want to use firewall and other lifecycle tools. So firewall would be, you're able to tailor your policy for the repository firewall to make sure that only the worst components aren't getting into your organization, while still empowering your developers to make choices on components. So perhaps you only want components that have a CV score of 10 to not enter your organization, but anything below that would still fail a build, and you would still get that information in Eclipse. So they can be used in tandem, or they can be used each product.
Okay, thank you. We have someone asking about a link to the presentation, so I just want to remind the audience that the presentation will be available in 24 to 48 hours, so you can watch the replay, and you'll get an email when the replay is available. We have another question. What happens when a vulnerability is found in a component already deployed to production?
Okay. So we provide continuous monitoring of your applications once they get deployed to production. So after it's passed through your CI pipeline, CD, and been deployed, we still run analysis all the time. So that Jackson vulnerability, perhaps you already had deployed it, it had passed policy, everything looked good, but then when it was revealed that there was a vulnerability in Jackson data bind, we would inform you that one of your applications is vulnerable. We have webhooks that come out from the Nexus IQ server that can be used for orchestration. So perhaps you would want to take down your servers. Generally, we encourage timely remediation over bringing down servers, especially because you don't want your production server to just die. So you could use a webhook perhaps to take something down. But in general, the JIRA ticket and remediation from your team to push the newest version out is the best practice.
Great. Thank you so much. We do have another question here, and it's, can you talk more about your integration to Visual Studio? Does it work the same way as it does with Eclipse?
Yeah, so that's proud of that one. That was one of the most recent products my team worked on. It does work in the same way as Eclipse. So in the Maven world, you're using components from Maven Central. But in Visual Studio, you're using NuGet components. So the Visual Studio integration will go through, and it works tightly with NuGet to try to understand what's in your application and what kind of policy threats you have in that. We have a lot of research that we do on NuGet components, just like Maven components, where we're able to identify all the licenses of NuGet components, security vulnerabilities, as well as the metrics that we talked about with quality, like age, or in NuGet you have a package and a version. So you can build rules around all of those, and all that information is available in NuGet. The version graph is available, pretty much everything you've seen.
Okay, great. And if there's any more questions, please submit them. We do have another one here, and it's who in the organization would typically create the policies?
Another good one. It depends on the size of the organization. I showed off both a team policy or an application policy, an organization policy, and a root organization policy. So generally, a enterprise architect, along with a security team and a legal team, would all get together and make that root organization policy. That affects everyone at the organization, and that is decisions that are made at probably the highest level. For your organization, your subgroup policy of that, it's generally done by a team lead who is looking over perhaps a few different teams who are building libraries and perhaps one or two distributable bits. They're the ones who take the root organization policy and augment it, usually make it a little more strict than the organization allows. They perhaps have they want to restrict a logging library, for example. My team only wants to use a certain logger, and I want to make sure that everyone's using SLF4J or something like that.
Great. Well, that looks like all the questions we have, but if you'd like, do you want to add anything, you or Michelle? Oh, actually, one question did come in. Do you need to be using Nexus Repository Manager to use Nexus Lifecycle?
There is not a direct tie between Nexus Repository Manager and Nexus Lifecycle. So Nexus Lifecycle has enforcement on CI, like we saw with the Jenkins plugin or the Bamboo plugin. It has a CLI, so that's really extendable. You can run a CLI in almost any build tool, as well as the plugins that we saw for the IDEs. So really, it's agnostic of Repository Manager. As long as you're building Java or NuGet or PyPy projects or any of the ecosystems that we support, I'm probably missing some. But as long as you're building that kind of project, it will provide intelligence and enforcement for it.
Okay, very good. We did have another question come in, and it's, do you provide any reports or dashboards to show which applications have vulnerabilities?
Sure. I completely missed the value prop of the dashboard. Let's see here. I believe I got my screen back up. We're building a lot on this. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our current customers to see it, and this is going to be a little light because we haven't done, well, this is why it isn't part of the demo. I haven't actually scanned that many applications. I just set this up for this particular demo. But we do have this dashboard that allows you to go through all your applications, organizations. You can filter, and you can get your specific view. This is per user. So as a user, I'd be interested, let's say I'm a team lead, I'd be interested in only my organization or perhaps even only my application. And I can see all of the threats that are currently affecting me and where they reside. So beyond just the JIRA ticket, which is kind of a day-to-day thing, if I want a big overview of what's going on, this dashboard provides all that information.
Oh, very good. How about, does the Nexus platform work with containers?
Yeah, so I don't know if Michelle will yell at me, but I think I'm allowed to say that our team has just been running, finishing a project for Docker scans. We currently partner with Twistlock, so if you use Twistlock, you're able to do Docker scans using the Twistlock product and then have our intelligence on top of it. But in the coming week or two, my team's been finishing up a native Docker analysis. So if you provided a Docker image, it will do a full scan of the application layer. Pretty much all the jars or whatever your distributable bit, depending on what language you're in, exist within your Docker image.
Okay. Well, that looks like all the questions we have. Is there anything, you or Michelle, do you guys have anything you'd like to add before I close out the event?
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. If you have questions, I saw a question come in about the slides. We will definitely be sharing the slides as well as the recording. But if you want to learn more about our platform and specifically IQ Server or the lifecycle product that Justin demonstrated today, as well as Firewall, please go to our website, sonatype.com, and you can get more information there, white papers, recorded webinars, and so forth. So just thank you so much, Tracy, for having us. Thank you, Justin, for the great demo, and appreciate everybody's time. Great.
Well, I'd also like to thank you, Michelle, and Justin, because you guys did a great presentation today and a nice Q&A. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, so thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank the audience for attending today's event. The webcast was sponsored by Sonatype and presented by Application Development Trends. So thank you. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day.